Om Namah Shivaya. Good morning, welcome back to inthekhud. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can take an image and convert it into a proper 3D scene where you can, at the end of it, you can take the camera and you can move the camera inside and you have a proper 3D scene here. We're going to do this using a paid Blender add-on called Perspective Plotter, but you could very easily use a free software called fSpy. One thing I'm also going to document is if you have everything set up right and inside your render view lights are still not affecting the objects, how to fix that. We're also going to use Photoshop generative fill to separate out one image into the floor, the wall and all the other things. Perspective Plotter. This is a Blender add-on that we're talking about in this video. Once you've installed it, which by the way, you go into edit preferences, install like your regular installation process, come in here wherever you've put that. So this is the install.me. You are not going to see in your end panel right off the start, but if you go into your camera view, now here if you press your end panel, you're going to see P plotter. This is what we're interested in. Now once you're here, we're going to start by taking your camera and adding a background image. That's the image that we want to convert into a 3D scene. So we're going to come into camera and take background image, and we're going to add an image. So we're going to open. I'm going to take the frame with the box. Okay. Now the first warning I'm going to say is background unmatched, because if you look at the format, your resolution is 920 x 1080 by default, but this is a portrait frame image. Okay, so we're going to click on background unmatched and it's going to take you to 2160 3840. You could change it later after the scene is set up, but I'm going to keep it at this right now. Now we have to plot the perspective. So I'm going to come in here and click on plot perspective. Now just like fSpy, this is going to give you these green handles and red handles, and you can change the vanishing point. So it is exactly fSpy but inside of Blender. And one could reasonably think, if a software like fSpy is free, why would you spend $18 to get a Blender add-on which is exactly fSpy? The thing is, the fact that it is right inside of Blender, it helps reduce that little bit of friction. And with something that I want to do with VFX, something so often, I don't want to be having to go back to fSpy, make changes, come back and import that fSpy file again into Blender and do that. So that little bit of friction is what I'm trying to eliminate with this particular add-on. And also I have seen the documentation, there are a lot more tools that you can use with this add-on, so that's why I ended up buying it. With that out of the way, we're going to try, and I'm going to firstly go into like wireframe, so the cube is not coming in the way. And if you want, you can increase the background image opacity by coming in here and increase the opacity so it's a little clearer to see what is going on. Now the way fSpy also works is you're going to try and establish the perspective of the image. This is something that I personally kind of struggle with, and I'm trying to get good at perspective, but let's try and do something here. The thing is, if you see lines, perspective lines in your picture, there is obviously 2-point perspective here, because you see there is one line which is going like this and there is one line which is going like this. Okay, so if I was to select in the direction of the mat and direction of the floor, and one is in this direction, so you can probably look at it as like your wall is one and your floor is one. But I'm going to take my Y and I'm going to try and align it to these here, because it's Blender, you can just basically use zooming in and zooming out. With fSpy you have to hold down shift and gives you more or less a similar kind of thing to work with. So I'm going to take one here, and we're trying to look at parallel lines. So we could assume that this is a parallel line over here, right? But it's not necessarily the case, because it's going to converge at some point. So let me take this as another parallel line, this one, although it is advised that your lines should be like as far away as possible. Okay, that would be one. And for this axis, let me take this mat here, because this seems like a more or less straight line. And another, we could take either this, but that's a little smaller, or maybe we could take something behind here, so something like this. Okay, now let's say this was your established. Okay, wait, let me take this part here. The top of the roof we could use. Again, it's not completely parallel. We're trying to get to a good starting point. Now why we have done this is you've established your focal length for the scene, which is 50.73 meters, and the camera distance is something you could change over here. I think it's moving the actual camera. Okay, so if I move the camera a little bit behind, because the perspective won't change that way, and you see that your blender grids, if it's a little unclear, so let me first make myself smaller and take the opacity down. When you're moving the camera distance here, you can see that the blender grid is actually lining up with the roof here, and that is a good indicator of where probably on the right path with the scene. So I'm going to go up until here, and I'm going to take this cube and bring this at the point of this box, because the idea of this video is that this box is going to be animating. So I'm going to try and rotate this to fit this. So over here I'm going to scale it in X, and now I'm going to go into the edit mode. I'm going to take this as a cursor selected, and now I'm going to go 3D cursor and SZ to bring it up. So you see that it more or less matches. Again, you can't like really perfectly match, because that box in the scene is not a perfect cube, so perfectly you won't be able to match it, but something that's good enough. Wait, I think let me make it a little smaller, something like that. Okay, so that's your box here. I'm going to rename this to box. Now post having done this, how do you go about making your walls and everything, right? For that I'm going to split the view into two. Here we're going to stay with the camera view, and we're going to shut everything else. Okay, Shift Alt Z, no, that's going to remove the background image, so I'm going to keep that and stay home. So now here, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything and say GZ, so that it's above, like your ground is, your box is on the ground, so GZ. Yeah, now the box is sitting on the ground, which is your blender ground. Okay, I'm going to go back to individual origins for a moment. Okay, cool. Now we have the box placed here where it should be. Yes, that's in perspective. Now for these walls and stuff, right, we're going to start by Shift C to like go back to the center. Let's say Shift A mesh plane. I'm going to start by this right wall here, and say RX90, and another thing we're going to do is RZ90 or minus 90, doesn't matter. So we're going to bring this here where this wall is going to be, and I'm going to scale this up in the Z. Again, I'm going to do the same thing here and come to the bottom edge of this plane. Shift S cursor selected, 3D cursor, holding on period gives you this orientation thing. So now I'm going to say SZ, so that we're scaling up from the bottom. Okay, and I'm going to bring this a little to this edge here. Now what we can do is we can go and make this as your pivot. I say SY to scale it up a long way. So that should go up until I think where this wall is, so right about here. Okay, and I can go into solid view here. Now I'm gonna actually use UV projection, but let me just rename this to right wall. We can also make the floor here, so Shift A mesh plane, and this is going to be pretty straightforward, so scale it up. We're gonna scale it up a little more so it matches up with, I think there is a way where you could just perfectly snap this. So I'm gonna come in here and take this thing down, GZ. There is this thing called snapping on your edge. So I'm gonna hold down Shift and press on edge and say GZ, and hold down Control is gonna snap to this edge here. Okay, say GX, gonna snap to this edge here. There is a little bit of this gap here. If you see, it's not entirely that way. So I think what I need to do is GZ, bring this here, because the wall is starting from here and this little extra part is still your floor. Interesting, it's not allowing me to go right over here. Okay, let that be. I'm gonna come in here and with this still selected, cursor selected, and now I can SX to bring it up like this. A little bit of extra room is fine, not a problem. I'm gonna bring this behind and snap here and say SY and take the floor all the way behind. It'll be something like this. Okay, so now we've gotten the floor and we've gotten the right wall. Now about the UV project situation, we're gonna come and select this wall and I'm gonna expand one more area here. I'm gonna call this a shade editor. Yep. Okay, now what you want to do now is obviously add a new material here, and we're going to call this background just for the sake. You're going to change it later to whatever you want. Currently we can call this background. We can come into modifiers. For UV project to work, what we need is a lot of geometry on the actual plane, because right now our planes are defaults. They just have 4 vertices, so that's not going to work properly. What you want to do is you're going to come in here and say control 4 or how much ever you want. I'm going to go to like 5 subdivisions and importantly change this to simple. And if you turn off optimal display, you're going to see in your wireframe mode that your plane has been divided 5 times. So now you have enough geometry. And the benefit of doing it this way through the modifier is that you're not destructively just adding geometry to your plane. It's a modifier. You can always shut it down and then move your vertices around and then turn it on again. And continuing the trend of non-destructive workflow, we're going to add the UV project modifier here. Again, you could come in here and inside your camera view, if you went into the edit mode, select everything and say U project from view. That is also going to do the exact same thing which I'm going to show you now. But the advantage of doing it through a modifier like this here is that it's going to be procedural, non-destructive. So I'm going to select the camera over here. Okay, so UV project. Now if I go into the material preview, you still don't see anything even though UV project is here, and that is because in your material you need to add this particular image. So the image that we used here for the background image, I'm gonna just find that image 1 along with the box. So I'm gonna drag this image right into my shader editor. That's gonna bring an image texture node and have that in it, and this color I'm gonna plug into your base color. So now you will see that because we have the UV project on, what it's doing is just projecting it in this particular way. Now if I go in here, you will see that something is off. It doesn't quite look right. Okay, so the way that you make it look right, okay, it's better to see from here, is by playing with the scale here. So the X scale and the Y scale. So I'm going to adjust the X scale such that, how do you know it is working fine, is you want to adjust it until some of the points starts to match. So I'm trying to focus here on this pipe situation. So until the pipe matches, that means the scale is right. Okay, this is the same as if you were to go into the edit mode and say UV project from view. Then the disadvantage is you would have to go into your UV editor here and then play with the vertices and try matching it manually. So this is why I like the UV project modifier, because you can just play with the scale and have whatever it is that you're trying to do. Okay, we're going to do the same exact thing to the background, so to the floor. So I'm going to take the background here, and again, one thing you're going to see, I'm going to hide the box here for a moment, is that it's like kind of weirdly stretched, and that is because it doesn't have the modifiers that we added here. So I'm going to select this and shift select this and say Control C. This is a copy attributes add-on. It's a free Blender add-on, just enable it. I'm going to say copy modifiers. So now this should have the subdivision modifier and the UV project. We just need to select the camera object here, and again you will see that something is a little off here. Okay, so now one thing that we have to fix is that this is not quite coming in here, and again that has to do with the scale. So if I was to play with the scale, I think I could just move it here. Yeah, if I move it here towards the wall a little bit, then we have this happening. We did it for background. I'm going to come in here for the box as well. We're going to take the background material and we're going to do the same thing, but we don't need the subdivision on the box, so I'm just going to add the UV project, pick the camera, and looks more or less fine to me, except for we have to play with the scale here. Okay, fine, let's assume that works. Okay, there is a little bit of, the thing is with the UV project modifier, if you take this cube up here, it will take whatever is being projected. It's like actually pretty straightforward, but initially it feels a bit confusing. So now once that is done, there's one important thing that I want to document here is if you come in here and say Shift C, okay, and this light here, let's say we go into the rendered view and we're currently in EV, okay. If you take the light here and you put it here, you will see that the light is affecting your scene. Let me make this an area light. Rotate it towards here. Okay, let's add an object constraint to this. Track to. We're going to select the box. It's always tracking to the box. I'm going to let's say I bring it somewhere here and I increase the intensity of the sun or the light. It's 1000 watt. What is the scale of our scene? Because it's not lighting things up. Okay, sun kills it. Area, let me add one more 0 here. Yeah, so this is one thing I want to document is now you see that the light is lighting up the scene and it's affecting the scene in the rendered view. But if for all of these things, instead of using a principal BSDF like for the background material itself, I'm going to remove the principal BSDF material and add the color to the surface. This is one mistake I was doing yesterday, is that if you do it this way, your light you see in the rendered view is not going to affect any of the objects, because for the light to affect your material needs to have either a principal BSDF or I think a diffuse BSDF should also work. So if I add the diffuse BSDF here, you will see now that the light is affecting things here. So don't just plug this image texture into the surface, either put it through a diffuse BSDF or a principal BSDF, depending on whatever you need. So I think right now the power is a little too much, so I'm going to go to 500. Oh no, sorry, it was 5000. Yeah, so now you have this kind of a setup where now again the sun and everything you have to match it from the video. If I want to just quickly show you how something like, if I was to duplicate this, take it behind and rotate it, so RZ90, something like this, okay, and I'm going to take it a little forward and over here and scale it up and Z. So you will see that is going to fit the whole thing. Now if you were to go ahead inside Photoshop, take this image and only replace it with the floor, for example. This is something I've done for the other video that I made as well. So you have your image here. What we're going to do is we're going to try and from the video there was this girl here. I'm going to remove the girl. Just going to come in here and I have set a shortcut for generative fill generative fill to G5 here. You can just click on generative fill, whatever. Okay, so yeah, that's how beautiful generative fill is. Just takes things out seamlessly from the image. So the girl is gone, and next thing we're going to do is take the box out. So I'm going to select the area of the box. We might have to do like a few iterations here. So this is something it does normally, is it puts in something else in the place. We're going to take this as a starting point and we're going to remove this part as well. Or let me just take lasso so I'm not affecting the other things. Okay, right now Photoshop is not removing things for me. You can write a prompt in more than 100 different languages. Interesting information. I don't know why I would want to do that. Oh, come on, just remove something for me, bro. Why is it so difficult? A little bit of shadow underneath on the tile would actually not harm, because we're again not going to use the render. It's just for a reference basically. The thing that I'm trying to show here to you So you see a few trials are needed in generative fill for things to work right. Yep, we're dead. So that is your image. Now the thing that I want to do is I want to take my pen tool, and firstly I'm gonna just select all of these and convert it to a smart filter. So it's one thing. Then you can't select stuff and like make masks, right? You can make masks. Okay, nice. So I'm gonna make a duplicate of this first. So I'm gonna take my floor. So floor, let's say your floor is this. I'm gonna say Control Enter to make it a selection, and we're gonna mask this. Okay, so let's say that's your floor. Now in the floor, ideally you don't even need things like your mat and everything. For the time being, for the purposes of this video, let's just roll with it. I'm going to use another generative fill on top to remove this tile part. And this I'm just trying to show you for the floor, because if we do it this way and then we replace that image of the floor with the image, then you can actually take your camera inside okay, so you can't just remove it. Let me do a Shift F5. Dude, Shift F5, make this black. Okay, that works. So now you wanna export this out. So firstly I'm gonna do is image trim transparent pixels. So we just have this much part left, and we say G6 is like my shortcut for export as, and export this as like, I've already made a few versions of the floor, but I'm gonna say floor 4. Okay. And inside Blender for the floor here, I'm gonna firstly change this material, because then everything else is gonna have the same thing. So I'm gonna come in here and make this a new material, and I'm gonna call it floor, and I'm gonna cancel this out and open the floor 4 that we just made. Okay, now why did we do all of this effort? We did it because now if you take your camera and you move it here, okay, you don't want to move the actual camera because then your projections are going to move. So let's just call this projection cam. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this and we call this animation cam. And with your animation camera, if you were to move things, nothing moves at all. That's because this is not the active camera. So your animation camera, you're going to control numpad 0. So now that's your active camera. And now if you move things here, yeah, this is the whole reason why I made the floor a separate thing. Is like if you go in here, of course by this point things are going to be like stretching. One more thing is you will see that these black things here, you can add transparency to it. So if I go into end panel here with your, because we are inside EV, you have to tell materials to use transparency or not. So yeah, now if you take your animation camera and move it in, you're gonna see it looks like a proper 3D scene. The same thing you want to do for your right wall and everything. This is the thing that I showed. So okay, that's it. That was it for today's documentation. Why am I having this on? Thanks so much for being in the cut. I will catch you tomorrow. Peace.